Ripple's XRP is the native token of the decentralized blockchain XRP ledger. Litigious.
For sure.
As recently as our conversation with Hester Peirce of the SEC, one of the commissioners, she said that the lawsuit against Ripple was still hovering. Where is it now? Because last night we started to hear that it may be disappearing.
So we have reached agreement with staff, and usually what happens is you reach agreement with staff makes recommendation to the commission, and then the commission votes. So anytime we make announcements about that, we are clear that we've reached agreement with staff. The commission hasn't yet voted, but what we've agreed is to dismiss and move on. We're actually getting the SEC we had put in escrow a potential fine of $125 million. We're actually taking most of that back, including the interest that had been earned along the way. And I think it's just evidence that the Gensler SEC was on the wrong side of the law. And thanks to the new leadership at the SEC and in the White House, I think we're seeing a much more constructive, much more pro-innovation. We want these industries to grow at home.
When you say most of the $125 million you had parked in that little fund in case of the worst case scenario, what's left? Can you give us some?
The SEC is going to end up with a $50 million. The U.S. government's going to get $50 million. We'd even talked about making that available in XRP. But look, at the end of the day, this is a major step forward. I think if you kind of zoom out and look at this, the Trump administration is absolutely living up to their promises. Guy David Sachs leading the effort at the White House, Scott Bessent, and certainly now Paul Atkins getting confirmed, I think, yesterday.
Yes.
These are people who are focused on how do we make sure this is an industry that can thrive at home with sensible regulation, common sense. And that's not what we had for the last 4 years.
What would you hope to see as common sense regulation? Have you talked to David Sachs, and what have you said? Hey, David, this at least needs to be front and center.
The two things that have the most momentum in Capitol Hill are around a stablecoin legislation and then something we generally call a market structure bill. Stablecoin legislation, because we haven't yet had clarity about at what point are banks involved, not involved, what kind of licensing is appropriate. Ripple recently launched our stablecoin under a New York trust license through the New York Department of Financial Services, which we think is kind of the gold standard for how to be regulated in this market. But having federal legislation that is providing clarity for the big players like USDC, Circle, as well as Tether is super important. I think we're going to see that sooner rather than later.
You know, President Trump has made big strides that are very pro-crypto. It's got to be great for somebody like you. However, the price of, let's just say, Bitcoin, which reached a high after the election of something like $107,000, is nowhere near that now. I think